All right, everyone say a prayer as I share my screen. Um, oh. Oh, John, it worked so perfectly in the practice.
Share screen button, and then you should see it on your screen.
I don't see it there. Oh, dang. Okay, let me reopen the
Yeah, just open the PowerPoint.
file.
It's fine.
Okay, here we go.
Perfect.
Okay. Great. Okay, so I am going to talk a little bit about just some guiding principles for success with young adult ministry. The things that I go over are going to be a little bit big picture, but it's really so that they will work for any parish. And they're really just the things that we've learned from our parishes over the last 6 years, which are the common threads among successful young adult ministry. So I'll just talk a little bit about these things. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about what the St. Meinrad Young Adult Initiative is. So as Tracy said, we received a grant from the Lilly Endowment in 2016. So we've been doing this work for about 6 going on 7 years now. And we serve the church primarily through 3 different means. So the first and kind of the biggest piece is parish accompaniment. We have 10 partner parishes who are engaged in the work of young adult ministry, and we really accompany them as they either begin young adult ministry in their parish or they work to deepen the roots of young adult ministry and really integrate young adults into the wider parish. Through these sort of relationships with our partner parishes, we've been able to do some research on young adults and trends that we see. And so we are working to disseminate that information and share it with the wider church, just for people who are interested in this work and who want to make young adult ministry a priority in their parish. So that's a big thing of what we do. And then also St. Meinrad has a seminary and a school of theology. And so we work on formation for seminarians, for priests, and also for lay ministers. And there will be a lot more of that coming in the future. Right now, we have kind of our partner priests who are in these parishes, as well as we have 120 seminarians this year at St. Meinrad. So working with them as well. And then our young adult initiative is part of a larger project called the Center for Youth and Young Adult Evangelization here at St. Meinrad. So it's a really cool place to work. So yeah, as I said, the 6 things that I'll talk about are a little bit more big picture, but in the handout that you'll get online, I have a list of more like program things, nitty-gritty things that have worked for our partner parishes, but I really just wanted to focus on the idea of changing the paradigm or changing the culture of parish and how we minister with young adults. So that's really what I'll be focusing on. So we've been doing this work for 6 years, and what have we learned that I can share with you guys? So the first big thing we talk about is to build a community and not just build a program. And I think this is a new way of thinking for many of us because we're so used to kind of the youth ministry model of you go to a certain number of classes, you have a certain number of hours, you receive the sacraments. It's something we're comfortable with. And young adult ministry in many ways is uncharted territory. And what young adults are looking for more than just a program to go to once a week, once a month. They're looking for a community and they're looking for people they can share their lives with. And so what we focus on and what our parishes have seen a lot of fruit in is to move from events-based programming into people programming. And what I mean by that is focusing more on creating space with our events for people to have conversations, for people to have genuine encounters, for there to be meaningful connections that are built. And so that they find these people who can walk through life with them rather than, I just see you once a month at a big event and there's 60 other people and we don't really get a chance, to share our lives together. And so the focus shifts from the event itself into the environment that you create, the space you create, and the ways in which you can facilitate people having those genuine encounters. And one of the things that we say a lot is, we're ministers, we're not events planners. Young adults are adults. They can fill their social calendar. We don't need to do that for them. What we're here for is to create a different sort of space where they can have the conversations they're craving, where they can ask the questions that are kind of burning without receiving a shutdown or a judgment or things like that. So really that is the focus of this, is building up a community, not building up a program. So the second thing I will talk about is to get your pastor and your parish on board. 100% of our partner parishes from our first phase whose pastor was not in favor of young adult ministry, or who did not see it as something worth investing in, they did not have a successful ministry. They ended up discerning out of the project. They went a different direction. The pastor just has to be on board in many ways, and for better or for worse, because he can be your biggest sort of cheerleader and promoter of what you're doing, but it can also be a roadblock if the pastor does not see this as something worth investing time and resources in. And I also want to include, to get the parish on board as well, because what we learned is it's pretty much impossible for one person on staff who is deemed the young adult minister. If a staff has a young adult minister, many don't, and many have jobs that are youth and young adult, and so the attention's kind of divided there. One person cannot minister in the way that we are asking people to minister. Everyone in the parish needs to be on board with this ministry, and what it becomes is the entire parish accompanying young adults versus one young adult minister whose job it is to get to know every single young adult that comes in. I've been a young adult minister. I can say that it's just not possible. It's just not possible. And so we say it takes an entire parish led by the pastor to effectively minister with young adults. And that's a big one. The next thing is the fact that young adult ministry is not a one-size-fits-all sort of model. And I touched on this a little bit when I talked about moving from event-centered programming to kind of people-centered, but this goes a little bit deeper because young adults, as we know from the Conference of Catholic Bishops, they define that young adult age range as 18 to 39, which is huge. That's a huge range of life situations, of ages, of different circumstances, things like that. And so there's not one program or one way of ministering that is going to reach all of those people and meet their needs. And another thing that kind of goes along with this that we've learned is, young adult ministry in a parish tends to take on the characteristics of the person or the people who lead it or who run it or who drive it forward. And so, when I was a young adult minister at a parish, I was mid-20s, I was unmarried, no children. And so that ministry really appealed to people in the same season of life as me, because that's when I could do events. And those are the types of events that I could put on. But to have a really, wide-ranging young adult ministry and to really capture the needs of that 18 to 39 or 20s and 30s, or however we want to define it, there needs to be a variety of people who are involved with planning and executing these events. But it also comes with the awareness that, one type of ministry is not going to appeal to all those people or work for their life situations. And so just recognizing the diverse needs of this age group. And Tracy will talk more about this in her part, but it really does come with listening and walking with and just knowing who your people are and what their needs are and how we can be there in those situations. So the next thing I'll talk about, which is really, really important for sort of driving ministry forward, is to set a vision and then decide on your measure of success. We always ask our partner parishes two questions, and I put them down there. It's, what is your vision for young adult ministry based on who your people are, where your parish is? It's the content of our faith, and it's the context of where your parish is. How are we going to deliver a young adult ministry, considering all of those factors? So setting a vision is really important because it allows us to have kind of that end goal in mind. And once we are all on the same page, we're all in the same boat, so to speak, like we can drive forward. But if the team or, whoever is planning has a bunch of different sort of mini visions going on, then it becomes very fractured and it loses any steam it could have in a parish. And then once you set that vision, the second question is, well, how do you decide if you've been successful? What is your measure of success for young adult ministry? And we talk about, sort of changing the metrics of how we define success, as we move from, program-based to people-based, we move from numbers-based to a different metric. And that's why it's kind of open to the parish to decide, what success looks like for you. And so I'll give a couple examples because that's a little bit sort of nebulous. So one of our parishes, they measure the success of their young adult initiative efforts. And do we see more young adults in leadership in our parish? Do young adults, are there young adults on the pastoral council? Do young adults lead ministries? Do they feel like they can come into these spaces and have a voice? That's their measure of success. And so then when they go to evaluate their progress, they can decide, okay, were we successful or not? But if they had set their measure of success at, we want to serve 75 young adults, that might not be reasonable for that parish. That might not be possible yet, but it could be in the future. So you can always, change that vision, change the measure of success, but it's important to define the terms, right up front. And I also want to say it's hard to evaluate the level of engagement at times. Like, how do you put a number or a value on relationship? And so really it goes back to, again, knowing your people, knowing your parish and what is reasonable to expect from your parish, but also like, how do we push this vision forward and decide whether we are successful in doing that? So it's kind of these different things that we hold in tension, really. That's important. Okay, so the fifth thing I will say is we need to empower young adults to be leaders and to have agency in their own ministry. And so what does this look like? I remember an old parish that I used to work at. One of the ministries was kind of declining and they were getting really worried. Our ministry is not going to be around. We need young people. And I was the young adult minister at the time. And I remember one of the ministry leaders came to me and he was like, Cassie, we need 5 young adults to join our ministry. And I was like, okay, well, who do you have in mind? And he said, well, I don't know the young adults. You know the young adults, just choose 5 and they can be a part of the ministry. And it was very interesting because it kind of pointed to the fact that, young adults are, as I said, as diverse as the age group, as diverse as the situations. We need to get to know them to decide where we need to invite them into based on their gifts, based on what they have to share. But then also, part of what they were looking for was just to lower, the median age of the ministry. It wasn't to invite the young adults to offer their opinions, because we followed this thread and we followed it to the end, and they really just wanted bodies in the room, And so when you invite young adults into ministry, into serving the church, you also have to be ready to invite their opinions and to invite them to step into these leadership roles. And so what we talk about is, focusing on mentorship and, helping young adults sort of find their way as leaders. And this could be even just advocating for them, to parish leadership, or helping them navigate parish politics, or, just being there with them as they try and lead these initiatives. And so it's focusing on mentorship over micromanagement or delegation, because the church is changing, and not the church, not what we believe, but the context in which we minister is changing. And no one knows this better than the young adults who are kind of living in this. And so inviting them into those roles and asking them to share their gifts and to share their expertise. And I mean, they're leaders in so many areas of their life. Why shouldn't we invite them to be leaders in the church as well? So that's very important. And the last thing, which I mean, for me is the most important thing, so I wanted to sort of end on it, is to be a leadership team that is rooted in prayer. And this has been huge for us, this phase of the initiative, is this idea that we cannot model good ministry if we are not taking care of our own prayer lives. And we cannot give to our parishes if we ourselves are not poured into. And who do we go when we need that? we go to the source, we go to God. And how do we model for our young adults what a prayer life looks like if we are not rooted in prayer? And then the big question that this kind of, leads us to all the time is, who do you work for? I mean, we work for our parishes, we work for these different organizations, but ultimately we work for the Lord. And until we put our work under his power and under his, he's the primary actor in all of this. And we just get to minister and be a part of it. And so really invoking his power in what we do is seriously important. And it causes transformation. I mean, it's transformative stuff. And I remember going on a parish visit the first 3 months after I started working. I was so nervous, but I remember going on this parish visit and sitting down with the team and just saying, okay, before we start, can we just open in prayer? Like everything we do, we open in prayer. We ask the Lord to be really present to us because we cannot do anything on our own apart from him. And I remember saying, okay, if you guys will just, bow your heads for a second, just center yourselves with me and I'll say a prayer for us. And at the end of it, I remember the deacon who was sitting at the table with us, he said, that is the first meeting I've ever been to where I haven't been asked to lead the prayer. I was like, really? Doesn't that get kind of exhausting? But it's this idea that lay people can pray too, we can model what a prayer life looks like. And it's not something to be prideful about, but it's something to just show this is not reserved for just a few people. We are leaders in the church as well. And how do we model that prayer life for our young people? How do we invite them to the possibility that they have this encounter with the Lord as well? And so everything we do, all those other, 5 things that I mentioned are absolutely nothing if we are not absolutely rooted in prayer. And I think that's all I have for this. And I know Tracy's going to go a little bit more into the nitty gritty of how do we get to these places. So I'll just pass it over to her.
Cassie, before we do that,
Yeah.
these slides didn't move. So I didn't want to interrupt you while you're in the middle of it. So would you just stop sharing the screen for a moment?
Yes.
And I'm going to pop up the PDF. Just talk us through.
Sure.
Just review. All right. So I'm just going to put it up. And people were wondering about the slides. And so let's make sure. Yeah.
Don't you love how it worked perfectly in the practice and then we went to do it?
But that's always that's exactly what always happens that way. So just give us a quick, let me go back to the first one. And
I'll just do a quick recap.
Yeah, just give us a quick recap.
Okay. We can skip that slide and the next 2. Cool. So yeah, the first thing I had mentioned was to build a community and not a program, to focus more on the people and creating environments for, conversation and encounter rather than trying to prop up a program or creating a successful program. It's more about creating space and how we use that space. That's what I'll say for that one. And then, to get your pastor and parish on board, just this idea that, a ministry can't move forward if the pastor is not on board with it. And what we're asking from our parishes was not just, having a space for the ministry somewhere off to the side, but really making young adult ministry a parish-wide focus. And in order to do that, the pastor needs to be supportive of it, lend his voice, but also the parishioners as well, because they are the ones who will probably have the most encounter with young adults. And so to have them invited into the work of accompaniment, of ministering, is really important. The idea that young adult ministry is not one size fits all. There's such a range of ages and realities, and the season of life from 18 to 39 is just so diverse. And so understanding that you need to know your people, you need to know who you're ministering to, you need to know who, what their needs are. And I think I also mentioned the idea that who's ever leading or driving the ministry, it tends to take on the shape of their life situation. And so having a variety of voices in that and having a variety of, the needs of a young family are much, much different than the needs of, say, an 18-year-old or a 25-year-old or a 25-year-old who's married with no kids. I mean, there's so many different permutations of this. So that's important to know. And then the idea of setting a vision and deciding on what will successful ministry look like. And maybe I encourage you to move away from the numbers approach. And it's such a comfortable metric for us. It's honestly an easy way to see, like, okay, how many people are we affecting? But there's just so many things you can't capture that the numbers don't capture. And so deciding, okay, for our parish, if success for us looks like, more young adults in leadership, or do we see quality interactions? Are people coming back for events? Do people know our young adults' names, or are they just like kind of piecing out right after Mass so they don't have to do the, awkward, let's all stand in the narthex, and, are people approaching them? These are measures of success as well. And they're more anecdotal, but I would say they're more telling as to how your parish is actually doing. Empowering young adults to be leaders, inviting them in to use their gifts and to use their talents and to use their expertise. Young adults are leaders in many other areas of their life, and they have these skills to share. And so kind of relinquishing control a little bit and acting as mentors and guides, yes, but then stepping to the side and letting their voices be centered at times, and let them drive some of the change, and let them give their opinions and things like that, and really supporting that. And then the last one that I talked about was to be rooted in prayer, as like the undercurrent to all of these other things. Is we can plan every event under the sun, but if we are not modeling prayer and a community of prayer for our young people, then really we're just like a community center, and that's good, and there's a place for that, but we are different. And so how do we model that prayer life for our young people and invite them to grow closer to the Lord in that way? So thank you, John. Sorry about that.
Thank you for the review. It was great. And Tracy, you are up.
Great. That was great, Cassie. Thanks so much for that. Because I'm going to pick up on a lot of those thoughts and do a couple of, just give you some of my experience of what I've been working on in terms of ministry with young adults, and what projects have worked, have flopped, that kind of stuff. So give me a second here, hopefully. Now, do y'all see my presenter view or just the main slides? Did I do this right, John?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, perfect. So welcome everybody. Like I said, I'm Tracy Lamont, and I am at Loyola University in New Orleans. And I've been with these national groups that I've been with have been really focused, kind of under the Bishops' Conference for the most part until most recently, really focusing on how to raise up ministry with youth and young adults, and I've been on the young adult side. And so out of that have become, several initiatives that have come from that I'm going to share with y'all today. But first and foremost, I want to raise up one of the more recent studies that came out last year from the CARA report. And because it's really fascinating, and there's the book on the side over there is the book that it was just recently released, Faith and Spiritual Life of Young Adult Catholics in a Rising Hispanic Church. And so the survey itself is for me, extremely important in terms of really unpacking the data. CARA conducted a national survey for 2,214 young adults with, if you know CARA out of Georgetown, they're very robust surveys. They use some of the best survey metrics in the country. And so this was young adults between the ages of 18 and 35, and it was the summer of 2020. So we have some pandemic material here, which is what a lot of other survey material hasn't really been able to capture just yet. Because most polling companies, and this is a real challenge, and we're seeing this with a lot of polling, most polling companies like Pew and Barna conduct surveys on young adult religiosity based predominantly on mass attendance. And so that's been there's a really fascinating book by Robert Wethnow, who's a sociologist, called Inventing American Religion, and that these polling companies have actually invented what we think it means to be religious by the questions and the sensational headlines that they get. And again, mass attendance is one marker of our faith, but it doesn't encapsulate all of it. And so CARA really wanted to dive deeper and get into the complexity of what we sometimes call disaffiliation, or people that have fallen away from the church. And to their absolute shock, which was very, I've talked with the researchers. I was just with Father Thomas Gaunt, who is the executive director for CARA, yesterday at a conference on this book, actually, and they were sharing that they were absolutely shocked. The researchers were shocked at what they found. They were not expecting these numbers. They found that 60% of young adults report regular participation in groups that practice their faith, provide service, or evangelize others, showing us that weekly mass attendance might not be sufficiently robust enough of a measure of faith engagement for young adults. 60% of our young adults are saying they are still Catholic and they are practicing their faith, but most of them are not doing it in the walls of the churches. They don't feel welcome there. Mass attendance being mandatory isn't really a thing anymore. That isn't a reason to go anymore. They are lacking that sense of belonging that Cassie was talking about. It's a really powerful, to me, that was a very powerful statistic that said, wait a minute, they're not all disaffiliating. They actually do say that they are still Catholic, and that means something. That means a tremendous amount, actually. So some of the questions that they were asking were, like, what programs, groups, things that you were participating in. And there's like 15% that were in like diocesan or parish young adult groups, not a high number. Other folks were in, volunteering like JVC or Mercy Volunteer Corps, Knights of Columbus, Vincent de Paul. A lot of them are finding like just faith and prayer groups in what we call small Christian communities. They're finding that, and this is the graphic that you see here is where they're going, and online is still pretty big. And that's something very important that I would raise up from this study is, and from the book, Darius Villalobos has an excellent book in the chapter, excellent chapter in the book. And he talks about, it's really places and spaces where young adults are gathering. And I've heard so many ministry leaders say since COVID, like, oh, everything's got to go back in person. We got to, go back to in-person gathering, programming and whatever. And they're just shutting down the online options. And it's a huge detriment. That's where a lot of young adults are finding a lot of safe space to be participating in faith groups. And so I just really encourage, like, don't shut down the online option. I saw some of you here were from Western New York. I was in one of our National Young Adult webinars, and we were just having kind of an open session maybe a year ago when things were opening up, closing, that kind of thing. And she had made a comment. Perhaps she was in the Adirondack area. I'm from upstate New York, so I'm a little familiar with the areas. And when COVID hit and everything had to go online, they put their young adult programming online. It was a Bible study or whatever they were doing at the time. And they got so many more young adults coming online because of how hard it is to travel in the winter through the Adirondacks, living in those areas. And so they realized that if they just stopped all that, they're losing all those young adults. And so just really considering the spaces of where young adults are gathering, I would just really encourage people to have hybrid options or just to keep some kind of online programming, because there are young adults that don't, there's a lot of mental health challenges facing our young people today. Some of them have tremendous anxiety and stress. They don't leave the house as often as they would. COVID compounded that. And meeting a group online is sometimes a safer and easier way for very busy young adults to connect. So I just share with that because it was part of the statistic there. And so, yeah, so in any case, the CARA, report was really, really powerful in just showing that they are growing in their faith, and it's just not in our churches. And that's something we really, really need to sit with, and we need to address and pause and figure out how to really move into another way of thinking, like Cassie was saying, of putting people before programs. So one of the things that I have always found that, is one of the challenges in why young adults seldom come to Mass or come to church. And Pope Francis just names it so perfectly in Evangelii Gaudium. He says, these quotes, I love them. An evangelizer must never look like someone who has just come back from a funeral. There are Christians whose lives seem like Lent without Easter. For all of this, I repeat, let us not allow ourselves to be robbed of the joy of evangelization. I put these quotes up here because Pope Francis is saying, and he has another quote, something along the lines of, stop looking like when you're at church, it's not a mausoleum, you're not dead. I had this poor student of mine in RCIA, and she would come, she would bring the group up, to the altar and walk down with the whole group when they were going to study through Mass. And, she has the Bible, over her head, or the lectionary, whatever she has over her head. I'm not the best with RCIA models. And she said, just the looks on everybody's faces were she's like, here we are celebrating all of these people who want to enter the church, and the looks on everyone's faces in the pews when you're walking back down that way is just bored, angry sometimes, like falling asleep, like there's no joy on anyone's faces. And I thought you think to yourself, well, you wonder why young adults don't want to be there. Just look around at the faces of the folks in the pews, And so that's why Pope Francis is writing this. We have to have a sense of joy in what we're doing. And that's a real challenge sometimes. There seems to be a lot of, especially in Euro-American contexts, and that's the context from which I'm speaking it from predominantly, there's just kind of a lackluster in our churches, and a lot of religious ed programming, catechetical programming that's focused on parents. A lot of those parents are young. A lot of them are under the age of 39, if you think about it, and they're bringing their children for religion classes and things like that. And oftentimes seeing these same very dull faces, getting a lot of lists of things they're supposed to be doing with their kids that they're not doing right, not coming to mass, they're not the primary formator for their children, faith formator for their children. And so they just hear a lot of negativity, and that's why I raise up this exhortation, this particular one from the Pope. I love all of his writing, but he's really saying we have to be people of faith. And if we truly are, then that means we share that joy of that faith. It's just so strong to me. And so in all of his documents, he's been paving the way for more synodal listening and accompaniment. And I'll reference Christus Vivit a lot, because that was the exhortation on young people. And I think 2019, I think is when that one came out. And there's a challenge with this. There's, even just the other day, I was given a presentation on something very similar, and there are a lot of folks that are challenged by synodality. They don't think that this is the way for the church to move into. They think listening is just willy-nilly, you're listening and then nobody's giving church teaching and things like that. And I'm just here to say that that's really not accurate. That's not an accurate portrayal of synodality. And I just, I can't say enough how important it is to listen to our young people. And that's what Pope Francis has been saying so strongly in Evangelii Gaudium, Christus Vivit, and now the Synod on Synodality, and all of his, you can see threads of synodality in listening in all of his work, his exhortations and his talks and things like that. Because listening it's a sacred activity. It's not, I'll get into it when I read The Road to Emmaus next year, but it's a powerful sacred act. It's something that I have had the absolute honor to be a part of, facilitating listening sessions for the current synod, for folks that just wanted to host listening sessions and didn't know how to do it, didn't know where to go. So I facilitated a few locally here, and then for what we called the National Dialogue, we created, that was out of the USCCB group, and it was an effort to bring, to unify the field in ministry with young adults and youth and young adults at the time. And so we created questions for these synodal listening sessions several years ago to use with parish ministry leaders, directors of religious education, catechetical formators, all of the, parents, and then youth and young adults, affiliated, disaffiliated, all these, different sorts of questions to just ask, to start dialogue about how people experience their faith. And so, but it all comes, it's all rooted in the Road to Emmaus. But we've been quoting the Road to Emmaus for a very long time. It's in our scriptures, obviously, Luke's gospel. And it's also, we're not our hearts burning within us, the USCCB's document on adult faith formation. And it's quoted widely. I think I would make a hunch that everybody here knows what it is. But I will share with you the beauty of preaching, the beauty of scriptural interpretation, the beauty of sharing faith, is that for me, I have probably in the last 6 years come to 3 very completely different understandings of the Road to Emmaus based on the way it's been said, interpreted, emphasized. And so I think Christus Vivit is, Pope Francis's writing about this is another example where I was really pushed to think differently about the Road to Emmaus, because he writes, we see an example of this kind of listening, this deep sacred listening in the Lord as he walks alongside the disciples on the road to Emmaus, even though they're going in the wrong direction. When Jesus says he plans to go farther, and I put in parentheses there, in the wrong direction, Jesus was going to go farther in the wrong direction with them. They realized that he has given them the gift of his time, so they decide to give him theirs by offering their hospitality. Pope writes, attentive and selfless listening is a sign of our respect for others, whatever their ideas or their choices in life. And to me, that was really powerful, because so often, especially folks that have like blogs and podcasts, when they're talking about the road to Emmaus, they say, oh, you know, they were walking along the road, Jesus appeared and broke open the scriptures. And I'm like, you just skipped a really important part there of listening. Jesus did not just crack open the scriptures. And when he did, he only did it. If you go back and read Luke's gospel, he only cracks open these scriptures based on the way they were presenting the scriptures to him. They were the ones, the disciples were the ones saying, like, all of this was told to us and we can't believe Jesus died. And he said, you just told me this was told to you. Why don't you have faith in it? He didn't crack open some random scriptures, bring some doctrine in. He reintroduced themselves back to themselves. And that's very powerful. And so a lot of times I've heard the road to Emmaus shared as if it's like, here's why we give out catechesis the way that we do. And to me, that's just not what Jesus was doing in that moment. He was accompanying those disciples and listening deeply to them and saying, you're the one telling me this. You're the one telling me the scriptures promise this. You're the one telling me about this great teacher that you're missing in your lives. Where's the disconnect there? Have faith in that. And so that took deep listening and finding where God was active in these people's lives, you know. So to me, the way that, and that's line 292, if you can't see that in Christus Vivit, to me, that's really powerful. And so, and again, it goes into, you know, the Pope's been preparing us for this way of being church, which is grounded in synodality. You know, and to me, he has three adjectives when he describes synodality, and that's encountering, listening, and discerning. Those are the three markers, I would say, that are the primary focus for becoming a more synodal church. And I'm going to get into that, the details of that and what that might look like in a moment, but I want to raise up, enlarge the space of your tent. This is the working document that's out now for the continental stage, and you could kind of just Google this and find a link to it, or I can put it up in the chat later on. And what he's asking for now, currently, he writes that it begins with listening, and it requires a broader and deeper conversion of attitudes and structures, as well as new approaches to pastoral accompaniment. And that's what I believe. I've always said good ministry with young adults is good ministry with everybody. You know, that there has to be, sorry, let me go back to the other one. Radical inclusion is what he's talking about. Shared belonging. These are all the things Cassie was just naming. And this is what's being raised up from different continents all over the world, and which is what I find, this is where the Holy Spirit is thriving, because people across the world, the people of God, the church is saying very similar things. We need to be more inclusive. We have to have a sense of belonging. Just because you come to Mass on Sunday doesn't mean you're a community. We're not true community just because we have one thing in common, and that's because we're Catholic. True community is where you're seen, you're known, and you belong, and you're valued. And that doesn't happen just by sitting in a pew. It can happen, it absolutely can happen, but it's not happening for a lot of our young people and others. And so I love this quote he has here about this deep hospitality in the synodal process. Instead of behaving like gatekeepers trying to exclude others from the table, we need to do more to make sure people know that everyone can find a place and a home here. And that was from a parish in the United States. And this is, you know, and he has said this in Christus Vivit as well, and this is a quote from Germany, leaving the comfortable position of those who give hospitality to allow ourselves to be welcomed into the existence of those who are our companions on the journey of humanity. And it's not, and this is where it changes from the language of ministry to young adults to ministry with young adults, that we are companions on this journey of faith together. We're not ministering to them, we're ministering with them, bringing them in as protagonists in ministry. And there's just an urgent need, and this was raised up, my next slide is on the national dialogue. There is an urgent need to accompany people. And there's a whole section on enlarge the space of your tent on young people. And it was precisely young people who brought about the need for a more synodal church. And that was all coming from the Synod on Young People, the most recent one, they're the past one. So they write, since our young people experience high degree of alienation, we need to make a preferential option for the young. I found these to be very, and this again, these are coming from all over the world. This isn't just the United States context saying these things. And so that leads me to a little more of the practical pieces. How do we do this? How do we build community and not programs? How in the world does all this happen? And so what I was a part of and what I was very engaged in was called the National Dialogue. And there's you can Google that as well. NFCYM, I think now kind of has the link to the rights or the link to the document now. And I can put that in the chat as well if you're interested in the report. But the findings were really, really powerful. And it's also, we can see some of those findings enlarge the space of our tent in the current synod right now. And so I'm going to share with you what I did. This is my dear friend Darius, he works for NFCYM. And so we were a part of the National Dialogue together. And I can't remember where we were here. It was probably Tampa, one of our last in-person gatherings for NFCYM and then the young adult group that met after that. And so let me share with you what that was all about. We gathered ministry leaders together to say what needs to happen when it comes to ministry with young adults. And we said they need to be listened to. And that was coming out of the Synod on Young People. That was at the USCCB fall gathering that year. Maybe it was 17, 18, after they had taken the survey results from young people in this country. They said, we need to be listened to. Nobody is listening to what we're saying. So I'm going to skip ahead to what we've done with the National Dialogue. So I thought, let's see how this goes. We have these listening guides and we were learning to facilitate listening sessions. So I worked with a group. We have a graduate of ours of LIM who became principal at a school. So it was all before like a year leading up to COVID. And he said, you know, we really need to re-engage the young adult alumni from the school in the community here. You know, they graduate, they go to college, they come back, whatever, and there isn't a lot of community building going on with the young adults that are alumni from the school. And I said, okay, you want to try the National Dialogue? He said, all right, we'll try it. So I went up there and I talked to his group. It was some teachers, stakeholders, parents, all affiliated with the school. Many of them had young adult children themselves. And I said, okay, here's what we've been trying. We have this listening session. It kind of becomes train the trainer. I'm going to facilitate a listening session with you all. Parker Palmer's rules, no fixing, no saving, no judging. This is a safe space. You're not offering correction. You're not telling someone their experience is not true. We are only listening and asking for deeper questions, but you're not offering answers. You're not judging, nothing. It has to be a safe space rooted in prayer. And so they said, okay, we'll try it. So I went with my questions, and it was hard because we have questions for ministry leaders, for parents, and they were both of those things. And then and then teachers were in the room too. And so, yeah, so I was like flipping back and forth with all this. My first time doing one of the dialogue sessions apart from the groups on the national level that we were practicing with. And it was very powerful. That group came into the room and they said, you know, when we were meeting each other, when the night started, before we started prayer, there was a lot, you know, from my angle, what I was hearing, and I had just met these folks for the first time, there was a lot of, oh, I do this with confirmation, I do this with our young adult group, and I know it's working, and I know this discipleship model I'm doing is working, and, you know, I think it's great. And I'm sitting there thinking, why am I here then if all of this is going so swimmingly, you know? And at the end of that, so then we had this very robust dialogue where people were sharing very deeply their experiences of church. And really 3 questions I would say are how you get this going. What are the joys that the church or your faith brings to you? What are the challenges that you've experienced in the church or in your faith? And what can we do as the people of God to grow together and to move forward and to address these challenges? And that's where that whole discernment with the Spirit comes in. So very similar questions like that. And then the group after that was then, now that they've been in a listening session and they understand the fruits of that, then they can go and do this with the young adults that we were talking about. And so we came back, I compiled all my notes, I wrote everything down. I was just a facilitator, not a participant. And I found these themes that the group of adults and stakeholders and ministry leaders that they were all saying. And it was that young adults want to feel like they belong, that they all could agree on that. That they had experienced, you know, really profound effects sacramentally, if it was adoration, if it was mass, if it was confirmation, that there was a really deep sacramental component that they experienced with young adults. that helped them in their faith. And there was a few other things. And this is just with this group. You know, again, these answers are not for y'all to write down or anything like that. This is for you to uncover with your groups. This is what this particular context, you know, these folks said about the young adults that they know. This is not what a poll or a statistic can't tell you anything about your people. You have to go and talk to them yourselves. And so I said, okay, what do you want to do with this information? What do you want to do next? And they said, well, let's go listen to the young adults we think, you know, that are home this summer, that we think are affiliated. We think they're still practicing their faith. And so they generated a whole list. They got phone calls and they called everybody. And there was 4 or 5 of them that had different listening sessions with the young adults in the community. Some of them host them in their homes. They had a meal together. Some of them were at coffee shops or wherever it was most comfortable. None of them came to the school. And I don't think any of them went to the parish. They were all in different locations because it was probably safer to be in those locations, because young adults think they're going to be judged for what they're going to say. And so one of the teachers had come back and he shared with me, he said he was nervous about it. He said, you know, what if I invite them in and they think like, oh, this is, you know, dumb. What can you do to help me? And when they came in, he said he was just nervous about the whole thing. And the young adults that came into his house with him and his wife, he said they offered me so much hospitality and welcome in my own home. And I was so taken aback by that. He's like, all the nervousness that I had just kind of fell away, you know. And it was just such a powerful, again, listening can be very sacred if done right. And the young adults had shared with this group, they said, one of the first things they said was, thanks for listening. Thanks for asking our experience of church. We didn't think anyone cared how we felt about the church. We went through Catholic school our whole lives and didn't think anybody cared how we felt about our faith. And then they said, this was so powerful to be able to actually talk about my faith honestly. Can we come back and do this again? Which means they just started to form the building blocks of a small Christian community, a place where they feel they were seen and known and that they belong. And it was just through listening. And then mentoring comes after that. And it's just a natural progression. They said, can we come back? He said, yes. So then he started hosting these evenings with these young adults with him and his wife in his home. And they were just talking about their faith and their lives and how they struggle with their faith. I can't think of anything more profound than that. And then one of the other things they said, and this is very, very instructive for those that say, I don't know where my young adults are. They're gone. I don't know how to find them. The young adults that are affiliated, that are around, they said, you know, my friend left the church. And I really think they would appreciate coming and talking with you, with all of us. Can they come next time? And if that's not a testimony of what listening can do, I don't know what is. And so I raised that up because the findings from the National Dialogue final report, they're naming all of these things that our young people need places to be listened to. One of the things, and Kara found this as well, they don't want simple ready-made answers. They want to be able to talk about questions. They don't want doctrine just given to them. They want to know why. They want to say, this hasn't been my experience. How do I deal with this? And that's where we accompany them. That's where we journey with them. And eventually, through all of this, a lot of young people will say, oh, maybe I can find a home back in the church again. But they're never going to find that if nobody accompanies them, if nobody listens to them and talks to them about what they're searching for, or their needs that they have, asking them where they found God in their lives. And so this isn't a program. It's not a program. It's a way of practicing synodality as a church. And one of the other key findings the National Dialogue final report found was faith formation and sacramental prep cannot be the same thing. Catechesis, sacramental prep, and faith formation, ongoing faith formation, are not the same thing. We're doing a lot of sacramental prep in our churches. A lot of it has to do with young adults. Sometimes it's, you know, RCIA models, or if they're getting married, especially those scenarios, but less and less of them are coming back to church to get married, because what do? They call, if they even want to, they pick up the phone and they say, hey, I would like to get married there. What's the first thing they hear? Oh, are you a member? When's the last time you came to church? And it shames them. That response shames them, and they hang up the phone. Instead, what should they hear? The joy of the gospel Pope Francis talks about. I'm so excited for you. What a glorious occasion. Look at all the beauty that God has put into your life to be getting married and to enter the sacrament. Why don't you come in and we can talk about it? That would be a very different answer than, are you a member? And that's why I raised up Evangelii Gaudium, is that we have to have joy. If we're people of hope, we can't call ourselves Christians and not be people of hope. And so I saw a lot of folks that were writing in the chat, about different age groups. And that's what I was talking to John about. So I'm part of the National Institute for Ministry of Young Adults. What we have done, and I was asking John if it's okay if I share that link, which I will do. What we've done is created a series coming up in like 2 weeks, I think is the first one. And broken up by building relationships with young adults by age group. So it's like the early young adult ages, single young adults, young families, single parents, and then bringing that all together kind of in an intergenerational model. So I wanted to raise that up because I was seeing a lot of questions about ministering to particular age groups in the chat. So that's kind of all I'm going to say. I'm very happy to keep talking about my experience of this. These were just questions you can all unpack, and you can actually take these questions. Sorry, let me go back. You could take these questions to a faith group. You can take them with your folks in your office and you can answer them. They're in the documents that John's got. Welcome to do all of that. But Willie James Jennings is an excellent professor and scholar, and he writes in his book, After Whiteness and Education and Belonging, he says, the deepest struggle for us all is the struggle for communion, that we belong to each other. We belong together. Belonging, he writes, must become the hermeneutic starting point from which we think about the social, political, and individual, and the ecclesial, and most crucial of this work, the educational. The Western education, as it now exists, works against a pedagogy of belonging. And that's where I think faith formation is really, really powerful. If we can create spaces in our programming, in our existing programming with young adults, where questions can come up, where dialogue happens, where a sense of fellowship is formed and belonging is formed, then we can start moving the needle towards creating greater spaces of belonging. And so part of what the National Dialogue was teaching me is that, you talk with ministry leaders, you can facilitate a listening session with them, and then say, who else needs to be listened to? Maybe it's pastoral counsel next, like Cassie was saying, they're not just warm bodies, they have to be listened to. Maybe there has to be a listening session with them. Maybe it's partly, do they understand what it means to, raise up, voices of young adults? They can't just be on pastoral counsel and be ignored, and that's the case a lot of times. So who's advocating for them in those spaces and saying, are we actually listening to what they're recommending, And then the last thing I'll add is just the importance that the CARA report was raising up, the importance of peer ministry. And so many young adults come to our churches and they say, I want to start young adult ministry. And like Cassie was saying, if pastor's not on board, it's a huge barrier, but it's not even just the pastor, it's the ministry leaders. I've talked to so many young adults that go to their churches and they say, there's nothing for me as a young adult. Can I try to start something? And they say, oh, we don't have time or resources. All you have to do is say, what would you like to do? How can I help? And then give some leadership. And that's where I think NCCL is really going to be stepping into this space by saying, like, people need leadership skills in ministry. Our young adults can use some very quick, leadership ministry skills to become peer ministers, to lead a Bible study, a faith sharing group, to start a service organization. So I'm happy to do more discussion on this. I'm going to take my slides down because I don't have the chat. I now have the chat open, but I saw all the numbers coming up in the chat. So I think there's a lot of time for dialogue here. So I'd rather do more with that. And here's the link. I'm going to put it in the chat. I think I'm putting it in the chat for the series that's coming up.
Thank you both. Just a few things to think about. For everybody who's wondering about the chat, I'm saving the chat. It'll be online. So thanks to Paul Jarzembowski, who's been adding all the links for us. They'll be online. You'll be able to get them. So you can't write them down quick enough. I know all that. So they'll be online and you'll be able to access them. And I'll put a special place for all of them. Thank you, Paul, for that. There's a lot of questions, but I'm not going to ask them. I'd rather say, when you think about a couple of takeaways that you would like people to take from today, what are a couple of takeaways that you want to leave for them? And Cassie, if you want to go first, that's fine. We'll do that in order.
Sure. Yeah, I think the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that keeps coming up in my heart is nobody knows how to do this work. We don't know. but that fear shouldn't keep us from trying. And I think Tracy gave an amazing start, which is the listening. And all of our partner parishes who have been in this program now for about 6 years, the entire first year of the process was just listening. It was not action. It was, creating that team of people who were going to be advocates for young adults in the parish. And then they spent the whole first year going out, finding the young adults, figuring out where they are and listening to them before they started doing anything. And I think I did see one question in the chat that I think it's like, we don't always know where to find them. Like, I totally get that. And so, one of our parishes did an ask of, all the parents and grandparents, like, do you have a young adult in your life who might be, thinking about coming back to the church or has questions? Like, we want to talk to them. And so asking people if they know people, I mean, that's huge. And if you have anything in your parish, like a database, and just doing a search for people in that age group. When we started young adult ministry in my parish, when I became the young adult minister, that's all we did is we emailed 200 people or something just randomly and said, like, we want to invest in you and we want to know, what your needs are. Can you just come, no strings attached, come to this free lunch that we did and tell us what your needs are. And so some of it is getting a little creative, but honestly, it's just almost becoming vulnerable to ask the question yourself and to taking it upon ourselves to see the young adults, recognize them, let them know that, they belong there and we want them there, but also recognize that they have needs that we might not be meeting. And so just to ask. And I think anybody with the heart in the right place for this work, who keeps all these things in mind, like, you could really transform your parish by just listening and responding to your young people. Because I've seen it happen in many parishes. So yeah, don't be afraid.
Yeah, do not be afraid. Tracy?
I think to launch off from that, Cassie, because I can't say it better. So thank you. It takes change. It takes thinking it's transformation, not change. I'm going to say that all the time. Change is just doing something differently. Transformation is, it doesn't even resemble what it once looked like. Thinking of a caterpillar to a butterfly, that's transformation. Once a soft-bodied creature crawling on the ground to a winged creature flying in the air, like nothing. And if that's in God's creation, then that means transformation is possible. That's the language of conversion. And that's the language that is framing the synod on synodality. And so, because we're so used to numbers, and of course I'm guilty also, I look and I was like, oh, how many joined us today? Numbers are, we're just so programmed. And the reality of the challenge of that is your pastor, your bishop, whoever it is, wants to know, how many did you get? Well, you need to start changing that narrative and start saying, I got 40, but do you know what this young person said? I got 10, but do you know the transformation in this person's life that's happening right now? I got 3, and this is what we're doing to accompany them. So follow it up with a narrative. That's the only way I can think of right now to start changing the numbers game, because I know these people sign your paychecks, and I know that they're going to want numbers, and I get that that is reality. But if we can just start teaching, let's start teaching by the way we speak to others, and say, yeah, like it's quality, not quantity. But that's hard, because if you don't have numbers in your program, they shut you down. And that's why we don't have young adult ministers, because everyone has had this horrible phraseology that I probably even used once. It's like herding cats with young adults. And don't think of it like that. Think of it as accompaniment instead. And deep listening. And again, like Cassie said, and like the experience I've had, listening is very profound and very sacred. Don't let anyone tell you that it's not. You have to take your shoes off to be in the presence of sacred ground. I have felt that. And that's the one big thing that I will say, especially with the current synod and all the synods that we have. This is not data collection. It can be, that's great. But this is telling you about your people in your community for you to respond. I heard ministry leaders locally here talking about the synod, doing listening sessions and saying, thanks for telling a whole bunch of young adults, thanks for sharing all these insights. We're passing them on to Rome now, and the Pope will do something with them. And I was like, what? The Pope's not going to tell you what to do in your church. That's not how any of this works. You know, like he's going to give us great advice and be inspirational because he's phenomenal at that, if you ask me. But now that you have this information, what are you going to do? What changes do you need to make? And that's where the deep prayer comes in and deep discernment. And you have to do it with the people you spoke with. Don't make decisions for them. Invite them back and say, what do we do next? Do you want to see a different ministry? Do we have to talk to more people instead? One of the things the folks said when we talked to the young adults, so that in the listening sessions I did with folks in the school, when they went out and talked to the young adults and came back, I said, what do we do next? Now we prayerfully discern with what we heard. We sat and it's scary because it can implicate you. What young adults will say might be, I had a bad experience in your program or in your Catholic school growing up. And that was hard to hear, very hard to hear. That's why you have to be, as Cassie was saying, you have to be rooted in prayer for this, because that listening's not easy. It's not. It can hurt sometimes to hear that you might have been a part of an organization or something that maybe didn't effectively promote the gospel as you thought it was going to. So it is hard. And so when we heard what the young adults said about their experience of the Catholic school, experiences in their lives, how they were let down, how they were not accompanied, it hurt. And there were tears in the room. And we were all there to support one another prayerfully. And I said, what do we do next? And they said, well, we thought we would go out to the disaffiliated next, but sweet Lord, what are we inviting them back to? We can't bring them back. We have to fix what's happening here. And so that's what I would, so, and again, this is process work. This is not like, and those that are like me with that, J temperament, Myers-Briggs, this is hard stuff. You don't have an end in sight. You have a vision, like Cassie was saying, your vision. What is your vision? What do you want what are your measurements going to be? But you don't know how that's going to unfold until you have listened and discerned with the Spirit on what you're supposed to do next. So I'll say that. I could say more, obviously, but I'll say those things.
So tell us a little bit, just real quickly, as we wrap up, the Young Adult Initiative. What are the workshops that are coming up, or the presentations coming up? When do those start?
Yeah, so right now we are very much focused. We are still a Lily project, and so it's a little bit like insular in some ways. So it's our partner parishes who come to us and we do these gatherings with them. But we are working on, as we discern the future of the Young Adult Initiative, we are going to start opening those up to non-partnered parishes to come. And so I'll have more information on that probably starting in 2020. What year is it? Is it 23? 2024. I don't even know what year it is.
It's okay.
So yeah, but I can put our website in the chat. We've got a blog and we've got our phase 1 report that we did, and it's the first 5 years of the project, and you can download the PDF for free and feel free to read through it. And then honestly, like my email, my phone number is on the website. Like I'm happy to talk to anyone about this stuff. So we're just here to be a resource, but there will be more coming as far as events and things in 2024.
Great, thank you. And Tracy, one of the workshop series or the presentation series, when does that begin?
Yeah, so that is, let me pull up the date here. I think it's still February. So February 28th is the first one, and that's building community with college age young adults. March 14th is building community with single young adults. March 28th is community with young families and single parents. April 11th is coming all together, integrating all of that. And they're all at 2:00 Eastern time on Zoom. There is a small fee associated with it, not too bad. And there's a package deal. I think it's somewhere on that website. And so NIMYA has its own website now. We're putting out resources for ministry with young adults. Anybody, if you look at the list, and I think that's the link I gave you, it's actually the link to the NIMYA. But anyone on the board of directors or board of members, contact them and ask them for resources and support. That is what we are here for. Similar to Cassie, so LimYam, I think is our website, but our Lily grant is called the Field Project. So faithful innovation, listening, encountering, and discerning is what that, so like kind of being a field hospital, like Pope Francis is calling for in ministry with young adults. So Lily's program, the whole initiative is to re-grant money to parishes to do ministry with young adults. So kind of putting through a learning design, but also that the grantees are an innovation hub. So any one of the grantees, I think Fuller is doing a great job. I think y'all at St. Meinrad we're doing a great job with you all had the first round of grants, being a resource hub for young adult ministry. So check those out. We're not there yet. We just got our grant, but will become a resource hub at LIM eventually. And I'll put our website in the chat. We just got that up and running too. Excited about that. But we are all here as resources for you all. Like absolutely, like Cassie said, email us. If I don't have the answer, I know people that do. Like I had questions for my whole group a couple of weeks ago about different ministry models, and I was texting the whole group and it was full support. So I'm just letting you know, we love this work. I think I'm sharing, speaking for Cassie too, we love this work. And if we can help you all in any capacity, please let us know. And our programming is responsive to what you need, like Cassie, all have a blog, like your blog is an ongoing reflection in daily life, I'm sure. And so, so just reach out is what my recommendation is.
Right. I'll have all these links on the online conference section of NCCL Catholic. So just go there. The chat will be there, but I'll get all these links so you can connect them really easily. So on behalf of really all of us who participated and for NCCL, thank you to both of you, Cassie, Tracy, for taking a really tough area, young adult ministry and young adult faith formation, putting some real light and hope into it. We're very, very, very grateful for that. For all of you who are on, we'll be back at 2 p.m. for young adults 40s and older. That's a lot of territory that Janet and Ruth are going to cover. So we're looking forward to there. And again, thank you again to Tracy and to Cassie for being with us. Thank you all for coming. Hope to see you at 2 o'clock right back here, same URL to be able to access. And go right to NCCL Catholic. You want to download the PowerPoint and the handouts. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, John. Thanks, Cassie.